This is what it might look like in your driveway if you have the crack in the bottom of your boat. There could be a little bit of water coming out. We don't want any water before we weld. So we can play a quick game here of heating, preheating with the heat gun, wiping away any drops that are coming out, and then going for a smear over the source of where the water's coming from, the crack. You can really hear it sizzle there where it's coming out. And what I'm doing is just wanting to run the water out with the plastic. I'll dig out the bad plastic. Before I can weld, I gotta make sure that it's dry. Here's another helpful tool when you're here. You can smash and really run the water out, or at least where its source is. Lets you push around plastic. You can do this with a paint scraper type device, anything that's rigid that you can push around on to make sure you get it sealed before you try to weld. So after the session with the open flame and the flat tool, I'm going back over the crack now with my welding iron, and I'm just back and forth making sure I'm running all the water out. I don't want to hear any sizzling. I can capture any little water in bad plastic like that. That's digging out what I think is the moisture. I want everything dry in there before I do buildup. The depth that I'm going is roughly like 1/8 of an inch, 1/8 of an inch to 1/4 of an inch. If you go about 1/2 an inch, you can start to get into the core. You want to be careful not to create a big problem. You start with a little crack. You don't want to go to a big hole. Keep your problem as small as possible. Don't open it up too much. You can get down in the core, then you have another problem of an open hole. It's harder to close. Easier to close a little crack. I might still have a little bit of moisture. I can see by little pinhole bubbles. So I'm running the welder over the pinhole bubbles, and I'm dragging out what I hope is the moisture. You can see one little bubble keeps coming up right there, and I don't want that. I want to make sure I get everything out. And then I can see there's some bad plastic. It looks kind of, I call it rotten plastic if you would. It's got water in it, and I'm going to dig it out. And it looks like it just has a different texture. It has this like confetti-like texture. And you don't want that in your weld. You want the smooth plastic, the smooth butter. None of the confetti-looking stuff that might have been contaminated with moisture, with water. So I'm running my welder over that area to make sure the bubbles disappear. We can see some bubbles right here. I'm gonna run back over there. I'm digging it out. That was a clean pass there with no sizzling. I'm prepping the area for buildup. I sealed the crack, got the bad plastic out that was contaminated with moisture, and then I can do buildup really easily once everything's dry. Okay, so what I'm doing right now is just before buildup, call it backfill. I'm just running my welder around the area, and I'm really making sure we're dry. We've got a good layer of plastic there that's ready to accept the next layer. If it goes in dry and we get penetration, the polyethylene molecules will make a chemical bond. They line back up. The old plastic and the new plastic, they won't know the difference from each other. But it's all about the prep. Gotta have her dry in there. Spend some time making sure she's dry. Spot right in there I need to dig out a little bit and make sure there's no moisture in there. This is an easy way to dig it out, just the edge of your little soldering iron. I've started to backfill this crack, and just like a welder that stacks dimes when he's welding aluminum or metal, I want to stack a little dime of plastic, just a little bit at a time. So I get her in there, I let my welder, which is my soldering iron, it's making penetration with the old plastic. I get her in there, I'm working out that little bubble. Don't want to see any little bubbles. I got something that's popping up on me. I like my little flat smashing tool. I'm working in my little piece, working my little bubble out. Smash her flat, smash the bubbles away. This can be done with a little paint scraper type tool. Anything that's flat and firm, little air bubbles that happen, smash them out of your plastic when it's hot. Come back in with your soldering iron. Make sure there's no bubbles in it. Smooth it out, feather in the edges so the plastic can't lift up on the outside. It's always contracting and expanding, so if it's not feathered in on the outside, it can lift up. Go around the outside of the weld, feathering it in. Make sure you got good penetration. You're getting penetration. This is your coupler. You're coupling new plastic with the boat with this. This is burning it in. Just like when the boat's formed in the oven in liquid, all the powder, this is getting it back to a liquid state, a melted state, where when it cools, let's call it thermosets, it's all bonded molecularly. Here we have what I call a finished weld for me. And what I'm looking for is a smooth surface. There's no bubbles, no little pinhole bubbles that we can see underneath here. And then all the way around the weld, I spent time just working my welder and beveling that edge, and I lift up the welder tip a little bit, lift up the back end of that tip so I can bevel, push down real slow, so the feathered edge, so the weld can't separate and lift up when the plastic's always contracting and expanding. And I'm really looking all over this surface for any little pinholes or bubbles. So I spent time on top when I was welding in little pieces of plastic, little dime-shaped pieces at a time. Spent time on top, pushing it in with a flat tool, paint scraper or flat tool, push it in, make sure I get a smooth surface and feather in the edges. This plastic here that's newly welded in will react to hot and cold contraction and expansion just like it does out here. We'll see these welds 10 years later that are just scratched up by the river. We'll go look at a couple around this boat. What we see here is a weld on this old boat. This is a 17-year-old dory of ours. What we see here is a weld we would have done, I'm guessing 7 or 8 years ago, maybe a little longer, as a drain hole. These I've drilled here when the boat came in with the crack up front, drilled the holes here to drain the water out. This looks like maybe my first hole I drilled 12 inches in. I didn't get the water out I wanted, so I went to a spot more up here. For some reasons, the foam will grow differently back here. You find a spot roughly 12 inches in, you form a drain hole. But this is a weld from roughly 7 or 8 years ago, maybe more, and you can see how they age in the river. Everything's feathered in, and it just becomes part of the boat bottom. It gets scratched up on rocks, things of that nature, but it doesn't separate or it doesn't leak from where it was drilled.